Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and you are very welcome to this exceptional podcast today. Like, normally, I would talk about success and I talk about psychology, sales, I talk about other elements around that. But today, I'm really quite fascinated with Bob uh, or Robert, however you'd like to be
It's got to
spoken.
be Jason. It's got to be Bob.
Oh, okay, I like Bob.
I am really repelled by Robert. The reason is that nobody in my life has ever called me Robert, except for one circumstance. When I was a young lad growing up, if my mother was angry at me, she would call me Robert, as in Robert, get in here.
Yeah.
And so to this, otherwise she called me Bobby, but I go by Bob. But anytime anybody calls me Robert, I flash back to those days as a young
When
kid.
your mother was telling you off.
Exactly. And I think I still have some post traumatic stress from that. So let's
Well,
stick
there's
with
a
Bob.
cure for that, apparently.
Yeah. Let's go with Bob.
Yeah, I'll go with Bob. I'm quite happy with Bob. So, Bob, you were referred over to me, and soon as I heard of your accolades and what you've done, I was going, I'm going to have to speak to you. And the reason I wanted to speak to you, because I'm fascinated by how success works in people, regardless of what they do. I'm fascinated by the mindset, the how you push through from adversity and how you've done what you've done, and you're still looking so very young.
Well, I'm only 79 next week, so I'm
Oh,
not
that's
too
good.
old.
Happy birthday for the
Well, thank
future.
you very much.
So a little bit about yourself, which I did a little bit of due diligence beforehand, and you probably heard this a million times, and I want you to take probably the best from it. So, American physician, cardiologist, and biochemist, groundbreaking discoveries from inner workings of an important family, the G protein coupled receptors, which probably means nothing to me, but hopefully you're going to educate me. And 2012 Nobel Prize for Chemistry, which is absolutely phenomenal. You should be delighted. I'm delighted for you. So I thank you for that to actually give us this throughout the world. So but there's lots and lots of other things about you which anyone that can do a Google search can find out. But I'm really quite fascinated with your story, but I'm also fascinated by how you got to where you got to and what are the anchor points along the way. So what made you be what made you get up to that fantastic area that you're in now?
Well, I think for one thing, I credit and I blame my mother. Okay,
I always blame your mother.
she was a perfectionist and drove me mercilessly.
Can I
Uh,
call you Robert now?
Bobby would be good.
I'm
Uh,
only kidding. I'm only kidding.
okay, but uh, for example, when I was in school, if I brought home an A minus, she wanted to know why it wasn't an A. If I brought home an A, she wanted to know why it wasn't an A plus. Okay. Uh, and then in my career, when I started winning prizes for my research, and I'll tell you in a minute how I got to that point, but when I started winning awards for my research, I would always call her up and I'd say, "Hey, Mom, I just got such and such an award for my research." And she'd say, "Well, that's very nice, Bobby, but it's not the Nobel." Uh, and so there was some of that. And of course, she didn't live. I was almost 70 when I got the Nobel, so she was long gone. She didn't get to see that. But that perfectionism and that drive, to always be the best, I think, is one of the things which always spurred me to try to achieve as much as I could. In fact, in terms of my story, there was a lot of serendipity involved because I never intended to be a scientist. I had no interest in science from my youngest days as a young kid, 6, 7, 8. I dreamed only of being a doctor, of being a physician. My role model was my family physician, a guy named Dr. Joseph Feibush in the Bronx, New York City, who made house calls. And when he would come to the house, he would bring this black bag carrying all manner of magical objects, a stethoscope, an otoscope, a reflex hammer, his prescription pad, and he'd let me play with all these things. And so as a kid, I want to be just like this guy. I mean, what could be more fun? I liked science from my earliest exposure. I just didn't want to do research. But the idea that you could learn all this science and all this knowledge that other people didn't have and apply that to make people feel better, that just seemed to me the be all and the end all. So with tremendous focus, I headed in that direction. Went to a special high school in New York City for gifted and talented high school students called the Bronx High School of Science. It was a public high school. And then from there to Columbia College, chemistry major, Columbia Medical School, and had a number of opportunities while in medical school to do research electives. Never did any. I always chose to do clinical electives because I was on that path to be a doctor. And then from there, I stayed at Columbia for my internship and residency and would have happily gone on to finish my training and go into practice were it not for the Vietnam War, which was raging in the 1960s.
Yeah, that's right.
And in the United States, there was a lottery draft for all men over 18. So it was a lottery. You had a number, and you went in or you didn't. But for physicians, there was no lottery. There was a doctor draft. That meant upon graduation, everybody was drafted into the Army, Navy, Air Force, or the United States Public Health Service. Everybody wanted into the public health service, including me, because we hated the war. We hated the idea of going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And in any of the other three services, you would go to Vietnam for one of your 2 years. But in the United States Public Health Service, if you could get that commission, you stood a chance of being assigned to one of their institutions or installations in the United States, such as the NIH and the CDC. So everybody wanted that. It was very competitive to get in. But fortunately, I had very high grades and good recommendations. So I got that commission into the Public Health Service as a lieutenant commander and was assigned to the NIH for 2 years, where I spent about 20% of my time taking care of patients and 80% of my time assigned to a research laboratory. That's when I first started doing research. Things went very poorly. For the first year and a half, I met with no success. And this was a new experience for me. I had never failed in a protracted way at anything I had undertaken in my life to that point in time. So I realized that research was not for me, and I had to get out of this. And so at the conclusion of my 2 years, I went off to Boston, to the Massachusetts General Hospital at Harvard to finish my clinical training with an eye towards becoming the physician and cardiologist I had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, during my last 6 months at the NIH, the research started to work. I published a couple of papers, started to like it, but didn't really fall in love with it.
Yeah.
And despite the entreaties of my mentors to stay on and get additional training in research, because they thought I had a talent for it, I left to finish my clinical training. And so for the first 6 months, this would have been in the early 70s, for the first 6 months up in Boston, I threw myself into the clinical work, which I had always loved and was good at. But at the end of those 6 months of full-time, intense clinical work, I realized something was missing, that I just wasn't as satisfied by the clinical work as I once was. And I gradually came to the conclusion that, I missed the laboratory. I really missed the day-to-day activity of doing research, getting data, figuring something out. So I found another mentor and up there, and I started doing research again part-time for the next 2.5 years while I finished my clinical training. But by the end of that, I realized that I was going to definitely incorporate research, but I didn't realize, I didn't know yet how much time I would spend on it. And so I got a faculty offer in 1973, which is when I came to Duke almost 50 years ago. And initially, I spent about 60% of my time in the lab and 40% doing clinical medicine teaching. But within a couple of years, the research took off, and I started spending more and more time at it until within a few years, I was probably spending 80 or 90% of my time in the laboratory. As they say, the rest is history. When I talk about my career to young people, I often title the talk "A Tale of Two Callings." I felt a real calling, a sense of destiny to be a doctor at a very young age. But then later on, I felt an even stronger calling to be a scientist. So I've been remarkably blessed in my career to have these dual aspects to what I do.
So, how did you find your passion? Because a guy called Zig Ziglar, is pretty famous, and you probably know him.
Yeah.
He always suggests to connect your passion with your purpose to your dream. And you suggested that you want to be something else, but how did you stumble across what you're doing to get to the Nobel Prize? Because that's really I'm saying I stumbled across. I'm sure you didn't just stumble across it. I'm sure it happened for a reason because you had your passion and your purpose. So what happened along the way? What was your mindset at that particular
So
point?
I think there are actually three elements, not two.
Yeah,
Passion, purpose. I don't have another alliteration for a P, but maybe we can come up with it.
yeah, we'll make one up.
I got one. Passion, purpose, proclivity.
Oh, nice word.
Yes. So to me, a proclivity means you. Maybe I'm defining it wrong. We'll have to look it up. I was going to use the word. I was going to use the word talent, but I'm looking for a P word, so I come up with proclivity. In other words, it's fine to be passionate about something. It's fine to be devoted. But let me give you a counter example. Let's say you're passionate about physics, okay? Yeah. And your purpose is to use physics to be an astrophysicist to discover new planets, okay? Mm-hmm. But guess what? You stink at mathematics and you have no ability whatsoever. You're doomed.
Yeah,
you can't be an astrophysicist unless you're brilliant at mathematics. Mm-hmm. So it's not enough to have passion. It's not enough to have purpose. You have to be good at something. And to me, success comes to people who marry all three of those.
Yeah.
I was a very excellent physician because I was really good at it. I knew I had the passion. I knew I had the purpose. But until I got into medical school, there's no way I could know that I would be very good at it. But I finished first in my class in medical school, and I was an outstanding physician. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, for the research, I assumed I was terrible at it because for the first year and a half, I made no headway. But then as time went along, it became clear I really did have some aptitude for this. So that drew me in even more.
So what happened at that particular point when you was getting a lot of stuff which weren't going the way that you had planned? What was going on through your mind going, things are not happening, things are not happening, things are not happening, but you continued plowing forward. So you must have been imagining something in your head. And I'm curious to find out what that was.
The main thing that was going on in my head was depression. I would say if I look back on it, I was really depressed during that year and a half. But what kept me going was the fact that I wasn't used to failing. And I was damned if I was going to fail. I mean, I was like a bull. I am going to just keep pushing. I won't accept this. And I just had the fortitude to keep pushing. And I think, that's a lesson. You have to be, in the research business, you really have to learn to be patient and take the long view of things. Big discoveries don't happen overnight. You build toward them. The actual discovery does take place overnight in the sense that there's a moment in time when you discover something. Okay. At 5 o'clock, you didn't know something, but at 5:01, when you develop the result of that experiment, you make that discovery. So there is an instant in time, but you may build towards that for years.
Yeah. And there's a direct correlation between what you've done and an entrepreneur and people in other fields of business, because the mindset is still the same. Like you fail at things, or maybe the choice of words isn't failure. It's there's no such thing as failure, but it's only feedback to improve on the process. But it's also that bounce back, like I would like to call it. Like, what do you do when things are not going in the way that you plan them to do? How can you pick yourself up? What do you need to do to pick yourself up? What goes on in your head when you're going, things are going crap at the moment, excuse my terminology, they're not going the way that I'd like it to do. So what are the behaviors behind that drive that forward? What are the behaviors that get you going, you're feeling pretty depressed, But, and there is that big but, you're not used to failing. So what are the behaviors that and attitudes that get you back on track and get you to change your physiology and change your mindset and whatever else that you do to get yourself back into action, or whatever you might want to call it?
I'll tell you one thing that was very important for me, and which I took to heart and which I try to pass along. For a young person who is failing and is depressed about failure, as I was, there's probably nothing that does a better job of picking themselves up than seeing a role model of a very, very successful person in their field who says to them, you know, I was exactly where you are. In fact, I failed for months, years, decades, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I came through all that. And from each failure, I learned something, and I made a better experiment and a better experiment and a better experiment. And finally, boom, a big discovery. I remember when I was at the NIH during those 2 years from 1968 to 70, I'd been there about a year. Nothing had worked. I was very depressed. I was having lunch one day, and a senior scientist who worked down the hall from me, not my mentor, but somebody I knew fairly well, sat down next to me and he said, Jesse, that was my mentor, tells me that you're really down, nothing's working. I said, yeah, this is terrible. He says, let me tell you something. He says, and this was a very successful guy. He says, what fraction of experiments for do you think work or advance the cause of the average scientist? And I said, I don't know. He says, well, you know, Bob, he says, probably not more than about 1%. He says, but look, he says, supposing we jump to not the average scientist, but an outstanding scientist, a world beater, maybe even a Nobel laureate. What fraction of their experiments do you think work? I said, I don't know. He said, you know, it could be as high as 2%. So that immediately impressed me with the fact that even for the giants, most 98% wasn't working.
Yeah.
So I learned that lesson. In fact, I think 2% is probably on the high side. And there's a talk that I give every year or two to the research fellows at Duke University, where I'm at, which is always very popular and which I frankly enjoy giving, called How to Deal with Failure and Rejection in Research. That's the title of the talk. And amongst other things, in that talk, I show slides of some of the most outrageous, nasty, mean-spirited, negative reviews that I've gotten on manuscripts. Now, you know, in science, as in other fields, we work by publication and peer review. In other words, before you can publish a scientific paper, you send it to a journal. The editor sends it out to other noted scientists. They read it anonymously and send back comments with advice to the editor to either accept or reject the paper. Okay? And sometimes your paper may go back and forth with revisions for a year or more. Well, I've written over 900, I published over 900 papers in my career. A number of them have really been batted around, okay? And I have some, I love showing it, slides where they basically use words like egregiously bad, totally misdirected. I mean, they're just horrendous. And I show them to these young people and I say, oh my God, the famous Dr. Lefkowitz, the Nobel laureate, got reviews like that? Wow, you know, that's pretty impressive. The other thing is, I've been privileged in my life to hear talks by many famous people in very diverse fields of human endeavor, from sports to entertainment to entrepreneurship to the military to science. One thing that every successful person ever always talks about, I'm sure you know this, in any kind of career talk, is how much failure they endured, especially at the beginning. So, I mean, that's a universal. So if young people can understand that that's not unique to them and in no way is an indication that they can't do this, I think more than anything else, that helps them to deal with that failure.
We're back in the room.
Yes, indeed. We lost you there.
Yes, sir. The power of technology and being transported to the other side of the world. And we were talking about failure then. And that's what happens with technology. It fails on us every now and again.
Right.
But what we do is we bounce back. And
Right.
what we do is we carry on, because that's the nature of adversity. And that's the nature of true bounce back. But you can bounce back and trickle forward, but you've actually bounced back and jumped up, which is a different metaphor to how we can feed forward and how we can educate people. Because you can have all of the degrees, you can have everything else, but if you don't have that particular area of going, I'm going to have to do whatever I need to do to achieve my vision, to achieve my goal through this adversity, but I raise a light, see it through the end of the tunnel. I can see that light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm crawling through it. I might go through a few turns, but I get through to where I need to go. But sometimes you don't always get there. But I think the life lessons that you're going to teach forward, because I think in this podcast, I always like to educate and show others and to teach forward and give some golden nuggets of knowledge along the way, because this is so transferable to every profession out there, in business, in sales, and whatever you're doing. And you've actually proved it, because you've gone up to the top of the top. So the question I was going to ask you actually is, if you were interviewing you, what question would you ask you?
Well, I guess I would ask me, well, Bob, I mean, what do you think the keys to your success have been? I mean, you're a smart guy. There are a lot of smart people around. A lot of them are a hell of a lot smarter than me. And you work hard, but hey, there are a lot of smart people who work hard and work harder than I do. So why have you been so successful? Well, I guess I've been lucky. But I recently published a memoir called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm.
Oh, I was going to bring that up, actually.
Yes, and so it's basically a memoir. It's written for lay people, not for scientists, although it talks a lot about my science, but more in the context of my life, how I became a successful physician and then an even more successful scientist. It got all kinds of interesting chapters and lots of funny stories.
Could you hold that up against the camera?
Yeah.
Because I couldn't quite see it. I did have it. Is available on Amazon and all of your.
Amazon. A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm by myself, and all kinds of great chapters. But one of them, I'm going to open to it, is on mentoring and how I mentor, because I think mentoring is very important. And some of the things that I try to teach, and obviously, I try to teach people things which I think will lead to their ultimate success. If I had to choose one thing above all else, it would be this: focus. Okay? Whenever anybody comes to my lab, a new fellow or a new graduate student, I sit them down and I tell them the following. There are 4 keys to success in science. The first is focus. The second is focus. The third is focus. And the fourth, you have to figure out for yourself. Okay. So
I love it.
Focus, to me, if there was key to my success and keys to other successes that I admire, focus. So many people that I see who could have been so much more successful than they turned out to be are not, because they diffuse their energies over a wide spectrum of things. Now, that may be okay for some people, but if what you're trying to do is make an impact that matters, then at least for some period of time, you're going to have to really focus all your energies on that. And I see so many young people, in research, you start off, you're heading for a goal. And then all of a sudden, an experiment gives you a completely unexpected result. Now, sometimes but not often. Sometimes you really should follow that lead, even though it takes you off the track of what you were doing, because that way lies an important discovery. Most of the time, it's a total distraction. Okay. And you have to learn to put the blinders on and ignore it and keep heading straight for the goal. Now, you might say, well, how do I know which is which? Ah, that's what separates the men from the boys, as we used to say, because nobody can tell you how to make decisions like that. But a mentor can illustrate it by showing you over and over again what he or she does in that circumstance. And so that you basically learn to make those subtle judgments. But focus, 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 and focus. Another thing I advise, enthusiasm. Okay.
Right.
You mentioned enthusiasm. Now, granted, there are some people who are very enthusiastic, but they're just not good at showing it. There are other people like me who you can tell when I'm enthusiastic, which frankly is most of the time. At my 60th birthday, which was almost 20 years ago, they had sort of a festschrift for me here at Duke. And about half of my more than 200 trainees came back to the campus. There were symposia, there were roasts, all kinds of things. And many of them told stories about what it was like to be in Bob's lab. And one guy, now a very prominent scientist, occupant of a named chair at Cornell, told the story that when he was in my lab in the 80s, one of the things that really kept him going at a fevered pitch was that he knew that his project was the single most important one to the boss, to me, of all the projects. And he said one night he was working late and he was taking a break. And so he was talking for one of his lab mates, and he was explaining to him that my enthusiasm for his project and the knowledge that it was the most important project to me is what really kept him going late into the night. And the lab mate said, well, I don't understand. He said, because I'm equally certain my project is the most important one to Bob. He says, well, that doesn't make any sense. So a third guy came along. They said, what do you think? I mean, is my project the most important or this other guy's? I mean, what sense do you get from Bob? He says, neither. He says, my project is obviously the most important one. So they were confused. So the next day they confronted me in my office and they said, well, what's the story? Which one is it? And I said, well, of course, it's all of them. I said, because in the moment I'm talking to any one of you, I'm so excited about what you're telling me that in that moment, your project is the most important one to me. So that enthusiasm, which you can't fake, by the way.
Exactly. It's in the eyes.
It's in the eyes, exactly. So that enthusiasm is equally important.
The question I was going to ask you actually is, what do you say to yourself? Because you've obviously got that enthusiasm, definitely got the focus, but we all speak to ourselves, to our unconscious mind, our subconscious mind. We all speak to ourselves all the time. Yeah. So what do you speak? How do you speak to yourself?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. It's interesting. I've become much more introspective in my dotage. When I was younger, I didn't think about what are the keys to success or anything else. There's a very famous baseball player in the United States. You probably haven't heard of him. He's deceased now. His name was Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra was a catcher for the New York Yankees back in the 50s when I was a little boy, and I rooted for the Yankees. And he was this kind of homespun, everyman philosopher, if you will. He had all these interesting quotes that are attributed to him, many of which probably are apocryphal. But Yogi was an amazing clutch hitter. Okay, he had a good batting average overall, about 300 lifetime, which is a very good average. But in a clutch situation, bottom of the ninth inning, the team is down by a run or two, the runner's on base, and if Yogi would come up, you knew he was going to get a hit. In that situation, he never failed. So one day he was being interviewed, and the interviewer said to him, Yogi, it's so amazing how you do that. How do you do that? When you're in that clutch situation and you've got to get a hit, what are you thinking? to put it in your terms, what are you saying to yourself in your head? And Yogi, just like that, responded, think? How are you going to think and hit at the same time? Okay.
Whoa.
Okay. So, yeah, all those years, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just so busy doing it that I had no self-awareness. I wasn't talking to myself about anything. I was just
doing
totally in the zone, fused with the
Love it.
project. I was the project. Okay. Sometimes it's like that when I lecture. Okay, and I'm in the zone. I'll start talking, and next thing I know, I'm on the last slide. And sometimes I've even had the feeling of saying, "What did I miss some slides?" And the answer is no. I mean, I just was. How are you going to think and hit? I was hitting, not thinking, and yeah. So as I said, I wasn't giving the lecture. I was the lecture, and so
you embodied the lecture. So you were the vessel. You were exactly. the complete.
The key, I think, is if you can find this, as some people refer to as this state of flow.
Yeah.
Wow. That together with focus and enthusiasm, and I think very importantly, for me, a sense of humor. Okay. Now, not everybody can be funny, but everybody can appreciate humor. But not everybody can be funny. And by the way, as I'm sure everybody knows, some people were created funny. Some people were created not funny. An important life lesson is if you're not funny, don't try to be funny, because there's nothing more grotesque from a non-funny person trying to be funny. We all know that. You want to just go under the table. But if you are funny, be funny, because the fun of humor provokes creativity. And
Absolutely.
I use a lot of humor in my work with my students and fellows in my lab meetings. And I find that the more humor that I elicit, the more laughs that I elicit, the more creativity flows and people chip in with ideas. They're coming from all over the place. And when you think about it, humor is pure creativity. It's a lot like doing science in the sense that you see relationships between things that ordinarily you wouldn't think are related. And now all of a sudden you juxtapose two seemingly incongruous things, and there's a spark where you see the joke and you laugh, right? And seeing the joke is in a sense like making a little discovery. So I think a humorous outlook on things and on life for a variety of reasons is very helpful.
That is phenomenal. Look, Bob, I really appreciate your time. I think I was going to ask you from Golden Nuggets, but you've given us a flurry of lots of wonderful bits of advice forward to help people get what they want and help people drive forward. I love the focus, and the other one you have to decide for yourself.
Right.
Love that. I'm gonna borrow that one.
Don't borrow anything you like. Borrow anything you like. Let me give you 2 or 3 quick ones and we'll finish up.
Brilliant.
Persistence. Okay, persistence in the face of failure. In terms of mentoring, I like to empower trainees, emphasize storytelling. That's another whole subject.
Yep.
Laughing and having fun. So there's it. Oh yeah, and one more. Preparation, and more preparation. If you're giving a presentation, if you're giving a talk, if you're writing a paper, a grant, whatever, anything of that nature, you can't prepare enough. And that's something that stood me in good stead.
So if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Yes, you got it.
Yeah, I heard that. And I was speaking to the son of Zig Ziglar, and he used to go out on the road shows with his dad. And he used to practice as much as he'd done that thousands of times before. But he knew that if he didn't, he wouldn't go into that flow state like yourself and give value forward in the ways that you've obviously suggested in this as well. So I think it's absolutely phenomenal. So how can people find out more about you, which is the obvious thing? You're plastered all over the internet, but Bob, you do your own dialogue back.
Well, I would say the best place to start is with this book. And in it, there are other sources that it points to. But a funny thing happened on the way to Stockholm. You can get it on Amazon. It's a funny book, but there's a lot of insight in it. If you want to learn more about the Nobel Prize, there's a whole chapter on what that was like. My roots are from a small town in Poland where my grandparents emigrated from, and I had a whole chapter on a roots trip that I made, all kinds of funny stuff in that. So I think that would be a great place to start.
Brilliant. Look, I'm so excited. I will actually order that, and it will go on my collection of books. That number 6. I've got 6 books to read, but I will get through to them. I'm still diving through 2 books at the moment, but I will definitely get there. You've been absolutely phenomenal, and I really appreciate you coming on today. And I've learned loads, and that's exactly my intention today, is to learn loads. If I've learned loads, I know my audience, and they're in a collective bunch, will learn loads about driving forward to success. So thank you so much today. It's been an absolute privilege.
My pleasure, Jason. Nice to be with you.